Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. When I'm not knitting, you'll likely find me in my studio weaving on the sturdy rug loom my grandfather built and wove on. Rag rug weaving is a physically demanding process that requires 7 to 10 hours of hands on time for my standard 32-inch wide by 48-inch long rugs. Today, let me walk you through the process. Before any weaving can be done, the loom must be warped. Most of the time, I use natural, undyed 100% cotton rug warp. My loom is known as a sectional loom because the beam that holds the warp threads is divided into 14 evenly spaced sections that will hold 28 threads each. I place 28 tubes of warp onto my spool rack. To keep things from getting tangled up, each thread is pulled through a small rigid heddle that is attached to the back beam of the loom during the warping process and weighted in place with a 7-pound iron I found at the antique store. I tie the first section of threads to the warp beam and start turning the food grinder handle to wrap the threads around the beam. That's right. Grandpa repurposed an old food grinder handle when he built the loom. 55 turns of the food grinder handle fills one section. As each section is wound on, I keep the threads in order by tying them and then taping them into place before I wind the next section. After all 392 threads are wound on, they need to individually be strung first through the heddles and then through the reed on the beater. Groups of threads are tied onto the front apron rod, and I'm almost ready to start weaving. From start to finish, it takes 10 to 12 hours to warp the loom so I can weave a couple dozen rugs. Before I can weave, I have to collect my weft fabrics. I never buy new fabric for rugs. Instead, I upcycle and go to garage sales, community thrift stores, or the closets of my friends when they're spring cleaning. As soon as fabric gets to the studio, it's washed, dried, and stored in my weaving stash. The two types of fabric I use most often for rugs are bed sheets and heavy t shirts. To prepare bed sheets, the fabric is cut into strips, the strips are sewn together, and then the long strips are wound onto large rag shuttles. T shirts take a little longer to prepare. They are cut into strips, the loops are stretched out, and then the loops are linked together. Stretching and linking t shirt loopers must be done outside because it creates a lot of dust and lint. I don't like to waste fabric, so later I'll cut the yoke and sleeves of each shirt into strips and sew them together and then stretch them before winding them onto my shuttles. Once my weaving fabric is prepared, I can choose the colors I will weave with and head to the loom. I use a hemmed edge on each of my rugs, even though it's more traditional to see fringe on the end of a rag rug. Fringe wears out very quickly and is not as durable as a hem. I stand at my loom with big rag shuttles in hand and weave and weave and weave. When one rug is done, I slip a couple slats into the work to separate one rug from the next. I check for knots in the upcoming warp and, if necessary, replace the warp thread so there are no knots in the next rug. Then I can start weaving again. After about a dozen rugs have been woven, I cut them off the loom, unroll the rugs, and retie the bundles of warp threads onto the front apron for more weaving. Each rug weighs about 2 to 3 pounds, so unrolling them from the cloth beam and lifting them onto my sewing table is a workout. Once the rugs are off the loom, it's time to cut them apart and hem the ends. Before cutting, I have to apply a bead of fray check along the hem so the rug doesn't unravel when I make the cuts. Each hem is folded and clipped into place. And then I use leftover warp yarn to do a thread by thread hem across all 392 threads on each end of the rug. Before the rugs are ready to use, they get wet finished. That means a nice warm soak in the bathtub with no rinse laundry soap. The tub is drained and I squeeze out as much of the water as possible. And then I lay them flat on a drying rack if I'm only washing one rug. Or if I want to wash more than one rug, they're hung lengthwise over my front porch railing so the water can wick down the fabric weft and the rugs will dry as quickly as possible. I hope you enjoyed visiting my studio and weaving with me. If you'd like to purchase a handwoven rag rug, check out the shop section of thechilidog.com.